All right, everyone. Ready to dive deep into wireless LANs today?
Absolutely. And get ready to go beyond the basics. We're assuming you've got the CS-METI stuff down.
Think of this as wireless LANs 2.0. We're talking ad hoc networks, routing protocols that'll make your head spin, and of course, diving deep into those IE 2.11 standards.
We're going to uncover the challenges of these decentralized networks, talk about security in a world where everyone's a potential node, and most importantly, why understanding this stuff is key for anyone who wants to shape the future of networking.
No kidding. But let's rewind for a sec. Wired LANs, they use CS-METI to prevent data collisions, right?
Right, it's like a well-directed highway. But in the wireless world, it's more like a free-for-all, devices everywhere trying to transmit with no lanes.
Okay, so less of it reacting to crashes and more about making sure they don't happen at all.
Yeah, that's where CS-METI comes in. Instead of reacting after a crash, WLANs use it to basically scope out the airwaves and avoid transmitting if someone else is already talking.
So it's all about being polite and not interrupting someone else's data flow.
Exactly. And this is super important for efficiency, especially with things like battery life.
Speaking of data, how do we even prepare it for this wireless adventure? It's not like we're just throwing ones and zeros into the ether and hoping for the best.
No, we're not.
Okay.
This is where things get really cool. We use something called modulation. Think of it like translating data into a language that radio waves can understand. We're talking DSSS, FHSS, BPSK, QPSK, QAM, all sorts of crazy acronyms.
Sounds complicated, but cool.
Yeah.
So we're basically manipulating these radio waves to carry information.
You got it. Each of those acronyms is a different technique to make that happen reliably. Now let's talk ad hoc networks.
These always seem kind of chaotic to me, like a bunch of devices deciding to have a networking party on the fly. Am I wrong?
Not really. Ad hoc networks are all about being decentralized. No one's in charge. There's no single point of failure.
So everyone can talk to everyone else directly, kind of like a mesh network.
Exactly. It's super flexible, but definitely has its own set of challenges.
What are some real-world uses for this kind of go-with-the-flow networking?
Think disaster relief. An earthquake hits. Communication infrastructure crumbles. Ad hoc networks can be set up quickly to create a lifeline for first responders.
That's incredible. So it's like a digital safety net for emergencies.
Pretty much. It's also being used more and more in military operations, vehicular communication, those car-to-car networks you hear about, and even sensor networks in remote locations.
Makes sense. Traditional networks wouldn't really work in those situations. But with all this decentralized freedom, there must be some downsides, right?
Of course. Scalability is a big one. Managing tons of devices without a central control point is like herding cats. And then there's energy consumption. Most of these devices are running on batteries, so every bit of data sent and received matters.
I can imagine, especially those emergency situations where power is precious.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have to talk about security.
Right. Without a central authority, aren't ad hoc networks more vulnerable to attacks?
Definitely. Imagine a bad actor injecting a compromised device into the network. They could snoop on data, launch denial of service attacks, or even redirect traffic.
So how do you even begin to secure something like that? It seems like a constant battle.
It is. Encryption is key. It's like scrambling messages so that only authorized devices with the decryption key can read them. Then there's authentication, verifying the identity of devices trying to join. And then there are trust models, where devices build up reputations based on their past behavior. It's all about building that digital trust, weeding out the bad guys. But it takes constant work to keep these networks secure. Now, how do you think data actually gets around in these ad hoc networks? They don't exactly have a GPS, do they?
No. I guess it's more like finding your way through a maze that keeps rearranging itself.
Exactly. And that's where routing protocols step in. And these aren't your everyday routing protocols. These need to be smart, efficient, and able to adapt on the fly. We're talking about things like proactive routing, reactive routing, even hybrid approaches that try to combine the best of both worlds.
Oh, yeah, break that down for me. What makes these routing protocols so special?
Imagine proactive protocols like meticulous planners. They're always updating these huge routing tables, keeping track of every possible path between devices.
Sounds like a lot of overhead, especially when the network is constantly changing.
That's the trade-off. Proactive protocols can be resource-intensive, not ideal for large or unpredictable networks. That's where reactive protocols come in. They're more like on-demand navigation, only figuring out a route when they need to send data.
So they're more adaptable, but potentially slower to react when a new route is needed.
You got it. It's a balance. And then there are the hybrids, basically combining those proactive and reactive approaches to find a good balance.
Sounds tricky. Got any examples of these hybrid protocols in action?
Sure. One is the Zone Routing Protocol, or ZRP. It breaks the network into zones. Inside a zone, it uses proactive routing for speed, but between zones, it switches to reactive routing to save resources.
So like having a detailed local map and then a more general map for longer trips?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Perfect analogy. Now, picture those ad hoc networks, but with even more going on, and you've got MANETs. Mobile ad hoc networks.
Mobile ad hoc networks, so the nodes themselves are moving around.
Exactly. Think self-driving cars, each one a node, forming a network as they move through a city.
So all those challenges we talked about, routing and security, they get even harder in that kind of environment.
For sure. Maintaining a connection in a MANET is tough. These networks need to be super adaptable, always finding new routes as nodes move around.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered ad hoc networks. Let's zoom out and talk about WLANs in general.
Sounds good. What about WLANs are you most curious about?
I'm always interested in the why behind the what. Like, why did we even need WLANs in the first place?
That's a good question. One big reason is that wired networks just aren't practical in every situation. Imagine trying to wire up a historic building or a huge campus. WLANs are flexible and scalable. You don't need to run cables everywhere.
So getting rid of wires was a big deal. What else made WLAN so appealing?
This mobility is huge. With WLANs, you're not tied to a desk. You can move around and still be connected. It's changed the way we work and socialize.
It's true, we're surrounded by WLANs, and we can thank them for those coffee shop work sessions.
Exactly. Don't forget about scalability. WLANs can handle a lot of devices, which is crucial now that everything's connected.
It's crazy how many devices we have now that need Wi-Fi.
And WLANs have kept up. But just plugging in a router doesn't guarantee a good WLAN. There's a lot that goes into designing these networks.
So what kind of technical stuff do you need to consider?
Throughput is crucial. It's how much data the network can handle per second. You need enough bandwidth for all those devices streaming and downloading.
Bandwidth is king, for sure. What else?
Then there's node capacity, the number of devices the network can handle at once without slowing down.
Nobody wants to be that person slowing down the Wi-Fi.
Exactly. And you've got to think about the coverage area, too. Make sure the signal is strong enough to reach everywhere it needs to.
Right. Dead zones are the worst.
Absolutely. And then there's interference. WLANs use unlicensed radio frequencies, so other devices using the same frequencies can cause problems. Cordless phones, microwaves, even your neighbor's Wi-Fi can interfere.
It's like trying to have a conversation in a crowded room. Sometimes you just can't hear over the noise.
Exactly. Careful planning and choosing the right channels are so important for minimizing interference.
So it's not just about blasting out the strongest signal possible.
Nope. And of course, we can't forget about security. We need to protect WLANs from unauthorized access and attacks.
Speaking of security, what about when we're moving between WLANs, like at a coffee shop or even just walking around a large building?
That's where handoff, or roaming, comes in. When your device finds a stronger signal from a different access point, it automatically switches over without you even noticing.
That is pretty seamless. It seems like magic, but I know it's not.
Right. It's clever engineering and signal strength and authentication all working together. And it's essential for how we use Wi-Fi today.
Stu, we expect to be connected everywhere we go. Now, to really get how WLANs work, let's dig into the technical stuff.
Let's do it. Let's start with the physical layer, the base of all wireless communication.
Okay, so we're talking about the nuts and bolts of how data is actually transmitted over the airwaves.
Exactly. The physical layer handles turning bits into radio signals and back again. It defines things like frequency bands, modulation techniques, and signal strength.
So it's like the language of wireless communication, setting the rules for how devices talk to each other.
Great analogy. And to manage all that, the physical layer is divided into sublayers, each with a specific job.
It's like a team, each member with a specific role.
Exactly. One key sublayer is the physical medium dependent sublayer, or PMD. It's all about transmitting and receiving data. It makes sure those radio signals don't collide.
And then there's the physical layer convergence procedure, or PLCP, right?
Yes. The PLCP is the bridge between the physical layer and the MAC-C layer. It prepares data for transmission, adding headers and trailers.
So it's getting those data packets ready to be sent.
Exactly. The PMD and PLCP work together to make sure data is encoded, transmitted, received, and decoded. But there's another important piece of the puzzle, the IE 802.101 standards. They're what makes Wi-Fi work.
Those are the standards that ensure devices from different manufacturers can talk to each other, right?
Yeah, you got it. The IE 802.11 family of standards defines how WLANs operate, guaranteeing that devices can communicate no matter who made them.
It's like the universal language of Wi-Fi.
Exactly. And the Wi-Fi Alliance tests and certifies devices to make sure they follow these standards. They're like the quality control for Wi-Fi.
Making sure everyone's playing by the rules. But to really get this, we need to talk about network architecture and protocols.
You read my mind. Think of a WLAN like a city. At its center is the distribution system, or DS.
So the DS is like the central hub connecting everything.
Right. Then we have access points, or APs, scattered throughout, each one providing coverage to a certain area. They're like neighborhoods in our Wi-Fi city.
Okay. So when my phone connects to Wi-Fi, it's connecting to an access point, which acts as a gateway to the network.
Exactly. The area covered by an AP is called a basic service set, or BSS. It's like a neighborhood within the city.
So if I'm in a big building with multiple APs, I'm basically moving between different BSSs as I move around.
Yes. And when you have two or more BSSs connected by the DS, that's an extended service set, or ESS. Think of it as the entire Wi-Fi city.
So the DS, APs, BSSs, and ESS all work together to create a seamless wireless experience. It's pretty amazing.
It is. But it gets even more interesting when we talk about how messages move around this city.
Okay, so how do messages find their way into WLAN?
Within a DS, messages are sent between devices using, you guessed it, the distribution service.
So it's like the city's postal service, making sure messages get delivered.
Precisely. And when data needs to go between a WLAN and a wired network, that's where the integration service comes in. It connects our Wi-Fi city to the outside world. Fascinating. So there are dedicated services for both internal and external communication. WLANs really are like well-organized cities.
They are. But things get trickier when devices move between different parts of a WLAN.
Like when I'm on a video call and walk from my living room to my kitchen, and my phone seamlessly switches from one Wi-Fi point to another.
Exactly. These movements are called transitions, and there are different types. If a device stays within the same BSS, it's no big deal. But moving between BSS within the same ESS is a BSS transition, and going between ESS is an ESS transition.
So it's all about knowing where a device is in the WLAN and making sure the connection doesn't drop as it moves around.
Exactly. WLANs use association-related services to manage these transitions.
Okay, tell me more about these services. How do they make sure my Netflix doesn't buffer when I walk around my house?
It starts with association. A device connecting to an AP for the first time, like registering your presence in the Wi-Fi city.
So when I turn on Wi-Fi and choose my home network, that's association. So
Reassociation is when a device moves between APs in the same ESS. Like changing neighborhoods within the city, you don't need to re-register just to update your location.
And disassociation is like moving out of the city entirely.
Yes. It's when a device disconnects from an AP, either because you choose to disconnect or because the signal is lost.
Association, reassociation, disassociation, all essential for managing those coming and goings in our WLAN city.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But we're not done yet. We need to explore the MAC layer.
The MAC lane, not Apple products, right?
Right. MAC stands for Medium Access Control, and is part of the data link layer.
Okay, so we're going deeper into how data moves within a WLAN. What's so special about the MAC layer?
The MAC layer is like the conductor of the wireless orchestra. It makes sure data delivery between devices in the same WLAN is reliable.
So it's ensuring the performance goes smoothly no matter how many instruments are playing.
Yes. The MAC layer manages access to the wireless medium, so multiple devices can transmit without interfering with each other.
That sounds chaotic. How does it do that? Still. Well, it starts by framing data, adding those important headers and trailers.
It's like putting those data packets into addressed envelopes.
Exactly. And it handles addressing, making sure each device has a unique identifier.
So every device has its own address in our Wi-Fi city.
Right. But the MAC layer does more than that. It also manages access to the shared wireless medium.
That makes sense, with multiple devices trying to transmit at the same time. You need some rules to prevent chaos.
Exactly. That's where the MAC layer steps in. One key mechanism is CSMACA, or a carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance.
CSMACA, we talked about that earlier, right?
Yes. It's how WLANs prevent data collisions.
Right, it's like being polite and not interrupting other devices trying to transmit data.
Exactly. A device listens to the channel and only transmits if it's clear. If it's busy, it waits a random amount of time before trying again.
Random? Why random?
That's the clever part. The random back-off time helps prevent multiple devices from transmitting at the exact same moment, which would cause a collision.
So it's like a controlled chaos, making sure everything runs smoothly.
You got it. But efficient access control is just one part. The AMP-C layer also ensures reliable data delivery.
But doesn't CS-MAC already do that by preventing collisions?
Preventing collisions is important, but wireless signals can be affected by interference, attenuation, things like that, and those can corrupt data.
So it's like the message getting garbled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where the AMP-C layer's error detection and correction come in. They make sure data arrives intact.
Okay, so how does it do that?
One way is with something called cyclic redundancy check, or CRC.
CRC, I think I remember that from my networking class.
It's used a lot in digital communication to make sure data hasn't been changed accidentally.
So it's like a checksum for data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a math formula that creates a unique code based on the data. That code is sent with the data. Then the receiver does the same calculation.
And if the codes match?
The data was transmitted without errors. If not, the data got corrupted somewhere along the way.
Indeed. Like an alarm system for data errors. What happens if there is an error?
That's where error correction comes in. If it's a small error, the receiver can fix it with something called forward error correction, or FEC.
FEC. Sounds futuristic.
It's actually pretty cool. FEC adds extra data to the transmission, so the receiver can correct errors without asking for another transmission.
Like sending spare parts just in case.
Exactly. It's a clever way to make sure data is good, even in environments where retransmissions are difficult.
This is amazing.
Yay.
I had no idea there was so much going on behind the scenes every time I use Wi-Fi.
It's pretty amazing, and it all comes down to the way these layered network architectures work.
And it all works together seamlessly so that we don't even have to think about it.
Exactly. But we're not done yet. We still need to talk about another key aspect of the MMAC layer, security.
We discussed encryption and authentication with ad hoc networks. Does the MMAC layer handle security differently in a regular LAN?
It's there. The main ideas are the same. Encryption and authentication are essential for any wireless network. But the MAC-C layer uses specific security protocols that are made for the challenges of WLANs.
Like what?
You've probably heard of some of them. WEP, WPA, and WPA2.
WPA2 sounds familiar.
That's because it's the most common one today. WPA2, or Wi-Fi Protected Access 2, is the standard for securing these networks. It uses strong encryption to keep data safe and prevent unauthorized access.
So are we saying that thanks to the AMP layer and these protocols, our wireless communications are totally secure?
Well, no system is perfect. Security is always evolving. As technology gets better, so do the ways that attackers try to find vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So we can't just rely on these protocols. We have to be smart and stay up to date to protect our networks.
Exactly. Keep your devices and routers updated. Use strong, unique passwords. And be careful about using public Wi-Fi without a VPN.
Good advice. We've covered a lot. From ad hoc networks to the MAC layer, it's a lot to process.
And we've only scratched the surface. Wireless LANs are always changing and evolving.
My brain is definitely full. This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for how wireless communication works.
It's pretty incredible what engineers have achieved. We've gone from wired connections to a world where high-speed wireless is everywhere.
It's amazing. And it all just works because of the work of so many talented people pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Well said. It shows how much we want to connect with each other and the world.
On that note, I think it's time for a break from all this tech talk. Time to unplug and let all this information sink in.
I agree. Sometimes you just need to disconnect to appreciate how amazing technology is.
Until next time, stay safe, stay connected, and keep exploring the world of wireless LANs.
So we've got these data packets moving reliably, but we can't forget about keeping them safe. Security is like the other side of the reliability coin.
It's true. A network's no good if someone can just grab your data as it's flying through the air. What's the MAC layer doing to stop that?
Well, encryption's a big one, just like we talked about before. It's basically scrambling the data so anyone without the key just sees gibberish.
So it's like a secret code that only the sender and receiver know.
Exactly. And those encryption methods have gotten a lot tougher over the years. We've come a long way from the early days of WEP, which, let's just say, had some holes. Now we've got WPA and WPA2, which are much more secure.
The WPA2, that's the one I always see when I'm connecting to Wi-Fi.
That's the one. It's the industry standard now, using some really strong encryption to keep your data safe from prying eyes.
So with the MAC layer on the case and these security protocols evolving all the time, Can we say our wireless communications are pretty much bulletproof?
Well, bulletproof is a tough word in the security world. Nothing's ever 100% secure.
That's true, I guess.
It's an arms race, really.
Yeah.
As soon as someone develops a new security measure, someone else is trying to find a way around it.
So what can we do to stay ahead of the curve and keep our networks as safe as possible?
Stay informed. Keep your devices and routers updated with the latest security patches. Those are crucial. And for goodness sake, use strong passwords and not the same one for everything.
Words to live by in the digital age. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those freewheeling ad hoc networks to the intricate workings of the MS layer.
It's been a whirlwind tour of the wireless world, that's for sure.
My brain's definitely feeling a bit overloaded, but in a good way.
A little bit of information overload never hurt anyone, right?
Exactly. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how much complexity goes into something we often take for granted.
It's easy to forget just how much is happening behind the scenes every time you connect to Wi-Fi, stream a video, or send a message.
It's truly amazing. And it's all thanks to the brilliant minds who've dedicated themselves to pushing the boundaries of technology.
To those unsung heroes of the digital age.
Absolutely. So, to all our listeners out there, the next time you're enjoying the seamless freedom of a wireless connection, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of data that's making it all happen. Until next time, stay curious.